We ready to go?
Oh, yeah, I'm ready.
All right, if I could call this meeting to order, ask you all to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Seems like many of us were together just a few short hours ago. Sure.
Jim just wanted to make a couple copies
Oh,
for
okay.
the press.
Let's see, our secretary is out at the moment making a couple copies, so we will have a short administrative break here.
My chair was too low. There you go.
On the side.
Over here? Oh, thanks.
Got it?
Yeah, thanks.
Board of Finance got back a few years.
They did.
Sure.
Well, Susan will
Actually,
remember this story.
It's a Republican chair, the adjustments are on the right.
When one of our members fell over.
Yes.
Those are those great free chairs that we got.
That was at the
from-
Rotary Room, I believe.
GE, yeah. They were wonderful. They were booby trapped.
That's pretty funny.
Actually, as long as there's a break in the action, just a quick update from last night's Board of Finance meeting. The new tax increase is 2.91%. The new mill rate is 24.05. If you exclude the impact of senior tax relief enhancement, the 500K of paving increase, and the 625 of surplus strengthening, the tax increase would be 1.97%. And that really, when we're looking at comparing to other towns in our neighborhood, in and around the region, one of the things that we're doing a number of things that other towns aren't. We've expanded our senior tax relief program, bringing it up $800,000 this year to a $4.5 million budget impact, which is phenomenal in the sense of we're doing that much work and spending that much money and spending that many resources to take care of that segment of our population, the seniors and disabled, that are one of our most vulnerable. In addition, part of our catch-up from prior years, we've been increasing the amount of paving we're doing in our operating budget to keep it away from bonding, which in the long run is the best financial move, fiscally responsible because we're reducing the amount of interest in bonding we're doing. And second, we're adding in $625,000 to strengthen our surplus, our rainy day fund or our savings account. Many towns in the area have a much stronger surplus than we do. In fact, most of the towns in the surrounding area, as part of their efforts to keep down their tax increases this year, are using their surplus to fund their operations. We are in a position where we can't do that because of our surplus balance, and in fact, we're still trying to restore it. So from a comparable standpoint, at 1.97%, that is one of the lowest tax increases around. And if we weren't making up for our past history, we would be down at that level.
Thank you.
So, as they say, with that being said, next item on the agenda. Oh, yes, sorry. Mr. Kiley, you asked for a moment of personal privilege.
I did, and thank you, First Selectman Tetreau, and thank you for being here today. It is on a rare occasion that an elected member of a town board feels compelled to strongly opine on the vote of another board. It typically doesn't happen that often, and in my particular case, in my history of close to 20 years being on boards for this town, it's only happened a handful of times. With that said, I cannot sit here and say nothing about what happened last night at the Board of Finance budget hearing. In my opinion, a treasured partner of this town, the Pequot Library, was singled out, and their budget was reduced 100% from $350,000 to zero. I will use the word disappointed. There are other words I could use, but I'll leave it at disappointed for now. I believe that vote was not in the best interest of our town. I don't think that vote reflects the interest of the citizens of our town, the patrons of all three of our libraries, nor do I think that vote should stand. Again, I'm extremely disappointed in the vote, but the tenor of the meeting was also difficult. Some of the comments made in general were disappointing. Some of the comments and questions that were directed at the Pequot staff when they came to answer questions, I think were out of line. Frankly, sitting there, I was embarrassed. Embarrassed to be part of our government that would do something like that without proper notice, without fairness, without balance, and without being reasoned. I don't think that approach was taken. So, the other side of the coin is, I do want to thank a couple people. Chairman Flynn, board members Walsh, LeClaire, and Brown for their measured, calm approach toward the matter. But unfortunately, they only had 4 votes, and the vote was 5-4. So it is my hope, and I don't know what the charter will allow us to do. I know there is a charter appeal process available that we use on occasion. It's not something that we use often. It's not something that people have engaged in, I think, 2 or 3 times in my times serving on boards. But if it is at all possible, and I know Mr. Tetreau and his team have already taken a look at this today, I would fully support both my time, my attention, my energies, any help I can be to facilitating an appeal process so that whether it's the Board of Selectmen or the First Selectman or whoever can represent the Pequot Library, they're able to come before the RTM on the first Monday of May and appeal that decision that took place last night that I think does not serve our town well. And I just want to put that out there as a possibility. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what the charter allows us to do on behalf of a not-for-profit versus a typical department head, if there's a difference, if it's available, if we can use it. I would ask everyone to look at it hard, and I would support and ask respectfully that we work hard on an appeal and get the money restored to the Pequot Library. Thank you.
Mr. Connolly, thank you. And just to clarify, or did you want to add something
Before
before?
you,
Go
so
right
you
ahead.
can kick it or end it up. I was not able to speak last night. I had stood to consider asking to be recognized, and the group took a break, and then when they came back from the caucus, the question was called. So what I had hoped to say last night was, as a member of the nonprofit committee, I felt it was important that the work get done, and we need to finish the work, and we need to do it expeditiously, so that we can have a conversation that will allow us to look at criteria. And that's what the second part of that committee was charged to do, was to look at the criteria as to why we choose as a town to fund certain agencies, what objectives we're trying to meet, which would have allowed that conversation to happen in a different way. In addition, I felt that if the Board of Finance wanted to make a change that in that direction, that stepping down certainly rather than zeroing out would have been a much more prudent way to go about that. So I very much appreciate the position now that the Pequot Library has been put in, and I think that we need to take a measured approach, and I think that an appeal process, I would hope that it would have the support, and I think it's a wise way to go.
Thank you. And may I just quickly add to that? And Selectman McCarthy, Vahey touches on a very important topic, and that is the process. There is a subcommittee that serves at the pleasure of the First Selectman, or is it the Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen,
It's the
I believe.
Board of Selectmen that has been working for a year and a half or so on the nonprofit process. And they're good people. They're doing a lot of hard work. They're not yet done. So therefore, the process has not yet been defined. How you get on, how you stay on, how you qualify, and all that stuff. So, which is what makes me further entrenched on the decision that was made last night was wrong. Because there isn't a process for us to point to and say, you don't qualify because of this reason that a committee has come up with that all town boards and commissions have approved. So, had that been the case, and had there been a more measured approach and something that I would call more fairer, possibly over time, maybe there was a place to meet in the middle and fix the problem. But certainly, reducing the budget by 100% and putting that partner of ours, the Pequot Library, in the position of losing upwards of 1/3 of their budget overnight without real notice it's just not good government, and it's not a government that I would like to be a part of. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you both, and I concur with my colleagues. I think disappointment is probably one of the best words to use in terms of what took place last night. When you look at the Pequot Library, that is part of the heritage of Fairfield. That's literally an icon when you look to describe our town. I grew up in Fairfield. I've never lived in Southport, but the Pequot Library was a big part of my growing up. One of the earliest memories I have is being 5 years old and being on the front lawn of the Pequot Library and sitting in a circle reading books underneath a big tree there. And I came back to the Pequot Library time and again, most memorably for me in one of my high school years and one of the major projects we did there because of the research material they had and the resources were available. I think as a town, it's important that we look at our financial obligations and how we take place. I think as a town, it's right that we set up a committee to take a look at this and come back with reasoned approach. 18 months is more than enough time to wait, and there certainly have been some extenuating circumstances in the last 18 months for our town. It is a little disappointing also that 2 of the 5 votes on the Board of Finance against the funding for the Pequot were 2 people that sit on that very committee, including the chair of that very committee. So I'm not quite sure if they wanted to move that along faster and help us resolve this, why they didn't move faster and have the committee come to a resolution and a better process than, as Mr. Kiley said, focusing on this one nonprofit and providing such a devastating, life-threatening cut to the organization. Practically speaking, there is an appeal process by charter. It can be appealed to the RTM if there are 2/3 of the RTM vote to restore some or all of the funding. That can be done. Steps are underway at this point, and we plan to move forward with assisting the Pequot Library in having their day in court, if you will, in front of the RTM to see if we can get some of that funding restored. Given that's not on the agenda, I'm going to ask that we stop with that conversation at this point, though I do thank you for your indulgence in listening to us, and I thank my colleagues for the points they made.
Thank you.
Next up is minutes. I've got to consider and act upon the minutes of regular meeting March 20th, 2013. May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion or changes?
Yes.
Cristin?
2 changes. On page 3, paragraph 3, the last sentence, which currently reads, Mr. Quinn said the last storm forced the school to use this new drop-off plan, which is safer and less costly than other plans. I would ask that a comma and the addition of the words, but requires staff oversight, be added. This was a major point of the discussion, I think, at that point. And then my second is on page 4, under tax collector refunds. I made a motion to postpone the item rather than approve, postpone to a date certain.
Oh, good catch.
All right. Jen, do you have both those changes?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on the amendments to the minutes?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes before us as amended. Any further discussion?
No.
We're ready to vote?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, and Cristin, thank you for your catch there. Next up, to hear, consider, and act upon the minutes of special meeting March 28th, 2013. May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
All right, any further discussion or suggestions, comments, amendments? Is that it?
Yep.
That's it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are passed. Next up, from the town attorney, a report on fire department staffing. Attorney Trembecki, can you be kind enough to step you through our
podium,
reports. At the podium, please.
Sure.
The microphone there
Thank
is
you.
what records your voice for the listeners at home.
Great. Well, I'm pleased to be elevated to the town attorney position. I thought this was just a one-shot independent counsel, but thanks, Stan. You know, I've filed a report which was furnished to the town attorney on April 1st, and I think you have it all now.
Just for the record, there were some technical difficulties in transmitting that to the board, so we received that, for the most part, I'm going to say around midday yesterday, so we haven't had much time to review it at that point. You could step us through that.
Sure.
From that standpoint, realize that while we may have briefly reviewed it, we really haven't had time to look at it in detail.
Yeah, it was a late night as well, so.
Sure. I think, you know, basically, to just start at the beginning, I was asked by your board to serve as an independent counsel to investigate, the charge says, to investigate any and all issues surrounding the retirement policies and procedures of the Fairfield Fire Department, including whether the same have been implemented in accordance with the town charter, the collective bargaining agreement. That's the gist of it. And as you know, the investigation was prompted by an anonymous letter that had been delivered to the Board of Finance alleging, in effect, that there were secret agreements being made allowing firefighters to retire at enhanced positions such that their pensions would be enhanced over their retirements. In connection with the investigation, I've identified in my report that I've spoke to a number of people via telephone. We're all listed in the report, and spoke to a number of people in person. I attempted to contact all of the firefighters who had had changes of position, which is spelled out in Exhibit B attached to the report, which was something that was prepared by the town Human Resources Department. And in most cases, pretty much all cases, I called all of the affected firefighters and left messages and eventually received return phone calls. If they're not identified in the report as having spoken to them, that means I didn't get a call back. The one thing, of course, that you need to know is that the statements that were provided were not taken under oath. There were not depositions. There were not subpoenas, things of that nature. We didn't subpoena records and documents. But that said, I have no reason to think that anybody was less than truthful or honest in telling or describing what happened. There was one firefighter assistant, retired Assistant Chief Chavanello, who I spoke to. He got back to me, expressed some reluctance to answer questions about this, and finally circled back and said that he'd just prefer not to answer questions about this, which was certainly within his right. We looked through the pertinent legal documents, including the town charter, and as its role in governing the fire department, both the first selectman's office and the fire commission, and we went through the collective bargaining agreement. I think in order to understand what happened in connection with the promotions, there's some background facts that you need to be aware of. Specifically, I didn't speak to everybody in the fire department, but there's a general sense among the retirees, among the current firefighters. I did speak to both the union president and the union secretary and the fire chief, that there's an expectation or a belief that future fire contracts may contain diminished benefits or diminished provisions affecting the current firefighting staff and the people that are eligible for retirement. I will also tell you that I think everybody, the chief, the affected personnel currently in the fire department understand the provisions of the contract and how it's implemented and what its various provisions are as it relates to retirements. The other thing that I think bears on this is the fact that there was no promotion list in place as a result of Hurricane Sandy having hit at the time that the test was scheduled, and that there was evidently an inadequate time to reschedule a test, so that no test was in place. So with that in mind, I think there are really two components of the promotional issue. One is the provisional lieutenants, and then the second is the lateral transfers, which occurred as it relates to the assistant chiefs. There are two, in order to understand this part of the contract, you have to understand the minimum manpower clause, which requires that there be a certain number of firefighters on for each particular shift. So if somebody's sick, somebody's out, they put an acting person into the slot so that they can fill that position. It's designed to be a temporary position. There's a provision in the contract that talks about provisional officers being appointed, and that states that you cannot put a person in a provisional position until 8 weeks elapse from the person going out. That is, someone goes out on a longer-term disability, so to speak, and there's an expectation that that position, and during that 8-week time period, the actual staffing is filled with other officers filling in on overtime. Once 8 weeks goes by, then the position is eligible to be filled with a quote-unquote provisional appointment. Now, attached, it may not be attached to the report, it's something that we sent, I didn't have it until this morning, was a timeline that was prepared by Exhibit D, which was prepared by a firefighter, Thomas Pond, who apparently is in charge of the records for the department. And what's interesting about this, for two things. One is he uses the word acting. I'm sorry, he changed it. In the actual exhibit that's attached to the report, he amended it to correct, the exhibit that I had said acting as opposed to provisional. And I asked him about it, he said, no, that should really be provisional. So acting, what he's given us here is accurate. It says provisional. And this sort of outlines a series of falling dominoes, I call them, which really started on October 19th of 2011 when Lieutenant Sanamo went out on long-term injury leave. And then Mr. Pond, Firefighter Pond, goes through in detail and sort of spells out how the positions were filled and the timelines that elapsed before the positions were actually filled. So I think it's very useful, and I don't know if you want to go through the detail of it, but it does spell out exactly how the positions were opened, who was placed in the positions, and how they were filled. I think the takeaway, though, the important takeaway from my perspective is that there is nothing in the contract that requires that these positions be filled on a provisional basis. There's no mandate that after 8 weeks a provisional lieutenant need be appointed or a provisional assistant chief need be appointed. That's a management discretionary decision. That was a decision made by the chief to, in fact, put people into those positions. The other interesting thing about the provisional promotions, if you will, there's a question, or at least it was a question in my mind in reading the town charter, because the fire commission has the sole authority to make promotions in the fire department. And your first thought would be, well, geez, these are provisional appointments. Why isn't the fire commission aware of these and making actual promotions? The word is defined a little more narrowly than that, because a promotion is only able to be made when a position is permanently vacated. And going back to, because if you think about it, someone's out on long-term disability, someone is permanently promoted into the spot, the person comes back, now somebody has to either get bumped or you have two people filling the spot, which is not budgeted for and not part of management. So going back, but the significance, of course, is once you are a provisional officer, and if you retire that day or the next day, you are now considered an officer, quote unquote, for purposes of the collective bargaining agreement and for purposes of your pension. So that an acting firefighter, acting officer, if he were to retire as a, quote, acting officer, does not get the enhanced pension benefits. It's only when one is appointed as a provisional officer that those benefits kick in. And again, those were clearly in the cases where we have the provisional promotions, which are identified on Exhibit B. All of those people were able to retire and able to retire at enhanced benefits. Now, the other significant issue which occurred related to the training officer transfers. And these are a little bit different because these are considered lateral transfers, laterals from assistant chief, an assistant chief being transferred from the line into the training officer position. I spoke to Assistant Chief Tracy, who was in the position in the presence of his union rep from July of 2007 to September of 2012. The position that has a higher base salary comes with a vehicle. The higher base salary, of course, being the key thing because that's what contributes to the higher pension benefit. Now, there has been some discussion, and I went back and reviewed Chief Fellner's DVD, his presentation to the Board of Finance, his comments to me, that this was all done by an agreement. Now, there is some dispute as to whether there really was an agreement or not. According to Chief Tracy, he was approached initially by Assistant Chief Tracy, was approached by Chief Fellner roughly around September 6th of 2012 and asked if he would consider, or I was told actually, that he was going to be transferred to the line, but that he needed to check with the First Selectman about it. Now, there is a little, on page 11, I did speak with both the First Selectman and his Chief of Staff, Mr. Mayor, and at the first meeting, we report here that that the First Selectman said that you should manage the department and run it as you saw fit. It's not exactly true. The second meeting, that's what the upshot was. But at this first meeting, the essence of it was, I'm not sure that you should do this at this point. I'm not really comfortable with this transfer being taking place. But again, important to note, Chief Fellner was not asking for permission, but more there to inform the First Selectman as to what was going on. Fast forward a couple of days later, Chief Tracy hears back from the chief that a lateral transfer is going to be made, and that it had been approved by the First Selectman. Again, there was a second meeting between the chief, Mr. Mayor, and Mr. Tetreau, and the upshot of this was that if you want to go ahead and make the transfer, make the transfer. It's your discretion. You're managing the department. Do what you feel you need to do. Tracy, at some point, learns that this transfer is going to take place and says, wait a minute, I'm not happy about this. I don't want this to take place, and involves his union. There's a meeting on September 11th at the chief's office. Chief Fellner, Assistant Chief Tracy, Assistant Chief Chavanello, and the union representatives, Lieutenant Smith and Tuttle, are all there. According to everybody, there was a long discussion about moving Tracy back to the line. And P.S., there were some statements made by the chief that he felt that Tracy needed line experience. Tracy denies that. Tracy says that he never needed line experience. In fact, he's filled that role on many occasions, either as a fill-in and otherwise. So the long and the short of it is, at the end of the meeting, and don't forget, in order for a lateral transfer to take place, somebody had to move, and it had to be Tracy. Otherwise, no transfers could be made. At the upshot of the meeting was that there was a sense that there was an agreement that had been reached between Assistant Chief Tracy and the union and Chief Fellner and Assistant Chief Chavanello. And in fact, Chief Fellner says that there was a handshake. Assistant Chief Tracy says there was a handshake, although Assistant Chief Tracy told me that he felt pressured to agree to this. Now, I don't know whether he changed his mind, whether he never agreed to this, but certainly there was some thought from the union that it was not, that they were questioning whether he was on board with this transfer. Long story short, after this meeting, Assistant Chief Tracy sent an email to Chief Fellner on September 21 and told him that he wanted to remain Assistant Chief Training and did not want to be transferred. Notwithstanding his, call it reneging, change of heart, clarification of his position, call it what you want, Chief Fellner sent an email September 25th, 2012, and transferred him back to the line and transferred Assistant Chief Chavanello into Tracy's position. And of course, Assistant Chief Chavanello announced his retirement 9 days later. That created another vacancy. At that point, Assistant Chief Curry was placed in the position on October 11th, and he announced his retirement the next day. The Chief Curry was senior to Assistant Chief Chavanello. So if in fact the seniority list had been followed, Chief Curry would have been offered the position before Chief Chavanello was put into the position. Chief Curry denies that that took place. And in fact, he says it was well known that he wanted this training officer position. Now, after the transfer was made, then Assistant Chief Tracy grieved the transfer. The grievance is dated on the 25th, received by the fire department on October 3rd. Now, and also there was another email that I received from Assistant Chief Tracy where he objected to the transfer being made, but agreed, said, you're the chief, I'm going to obey the order. This is on September 25. In speaking to Assistant Chief Curry, he advised that in part, his retirement was based upon the fact that the grievance had been filed by Assistant Chief Tracy, and he felt that had Tracy been successful, he might end up getting put back into a line position and then lose the benefit that had would accrue to him as the training officer. So he decided it wasn't worth the risk and decided to retire, is what he told me. In fact, that did resolve the Tracy grievance. Once Curry retired, Assistant Chief Tracy was reassigned back into the training office position and withdrew his grievance. Now, his grievance contended, Tracy's grievance contended that the transfer took place against his will. The point, though, is, according to the chief, this was all based upon an agreement. Tracy revoked his agreement, if there had been an agreement, and did it in writing prior to the transfer being made, so that whether there was an agreement or not, it had been withdrawn, at least as far as Tracy was concerned. So I think those are the facts as it relates to that particular transfer. I think it's really important to note that there was no, at least as far as I could say that we could find, there was no direct evidence produced by anybody to show that anybody sat down and got together and worked out a plan or a scheme to make this happen. I have no direct evidence of that. No one said that that happened. But by the same token, I think that there's a lot of circumstantial evidence here to infer what was happening. Everybody understood what the terms of the contract were. Everybody expressed a belief or a concern that the next contract was not going to be as lucrative, if you will, or as favorable to the firefighters. And who knows whether that's going to happen or not, but certainly there was a feeling that that might happen. So that if you were of the population, that is, you've had the requisite numbers of years and requisite age, your natural concern is going to be, well, if I have an opportunity to retire, I'm going to take it because the next opportunity might not be so good. I mean, that's just common sense. Now, there is some history. The chief provided me with a note from former Chief Russell indicating that in the past that these kinds of transfers took place so that people could retire at higher levels. There was also an indication that there was a transfer to the training office made some years ago to allow an officer to transfer. Whether these things were done and people knew about them or not, I think is really, I don't know whether the public knew about them necessarily, but these may have been things that happened in the department and were considered routine. But what happened here, I think, is because we had you had a unique confluence of events. That is, a number of people being retirement ready and openings which opened up. And if you buy the argument that this was all done in accordance with past practice, well then, I guess everything's okay. But I would argue that this was not done in accordance with the technical wording of the contract. So that's it.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Yes, I do
Cristin?
have one clarifying question. Thank
Sure.
you, Mr. Trembecki, for coming here before us and The clarifying question is actually on page 13, and something that you said about Assistant Chief Curry. And in your written report, the position wasn't offered to him, and it says Curry also told the undersigned that his intentions to retire were well known. When you spoke about it a few minutes ago, you said it was well known that he wanted the position. So are both of those statements true? Or
That's what he told me.
Okay.
That A, his intention to retire was well known, and his desire for the position was well known.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a clarifying question for me, because I think we're going to need some time to go through this and understand it and have the opportunity to come back and, with the Fire Commission's input, take a broader look at
Sure.
both of these documents and the presentation. But thank you very much, Mr. Trembecki. The only question I have at the moment is, it's time, it's kind of a timeline question. It doesn't, there's this schedule back here, Exhibit B, which was provided to you by Human Resources.
Right.
Actually was created by me.
Oh, okay.
But no, that's fine. And which kind of walks you through dates and things like that. But what I don't know is the timeline between, dates of announcements of retirement and actual dates of retirement, and how those timelines might affect the overall picture.
I don't know the answer to that, because I took this Exhibit B at face value and assumed that this was just accurate because it came to me from the Human Resources Department. I didn't really look beyond what I was given.
Okay, and I did the same thing. I went back and forth a couple times in creation of this with HR, but I still am not 100% that every date is date accurate, and I just wanted to make sure that it was, or if we could vet that, just to make sure that there isn't a missing date or a date that might be off a couple days. But
I assumed it was right, so, I mean,
No, and that's-
because it came from HR, I just figured it was.
And I think
maybe,
it is.
Maybe I believe they've gone back and double-checked, and I believe the finance department got involved to confirm the dates in the paperwork. But
Okay.
perhaps the action item might be to have our internal auditor take a look and just verify that there's
Yeah.
paperwork support for each of those dates. I believe that's already happened.
Okay.
And I believe that corrected some of the earlier dates that you were initially
they got
given.
moved out, right?
But
Mhm.
I think we can certainly go back and verify that that took place.
I did have the
And Jen,
actual
if you could leave that
retirement.
as an action item, please.
I did have the actual retirement paperwork, but I quite honestly didn't cross-check it against this. I assumed
Yeah.
somebody else did.
Okay.
And I think Ms. Nolfi is probably cheaper in cross-checking those dates than our esteemed colleague.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you.
Right, so I just
Well
wanted to make sure
said.
that those dates were accurate, because there was some shifting around of them. And beyond that, once the dates are completely accurate, I just don't know if it affects or changes any of the conclusions that you have come to in your report, if things were moved or if they're still where they need to be.
Yeah, it's possible, but unless there were, unless there were major changes in the dates, I don't think it really would.
Okay.
I mean, I think, for my purposes, the dates were important, but I think it was more, I was focusing more on kind of what happened, as
Right.
opposed to exactly when it happened.
Right,
And
and
I think Lieutenant Firefighter's Pond's Exhibit D, it's a little, you have to kind of walk through it, but it
Yeah.
makes sense when you do walk through it.
yeah, and I'm looking at these two documents side by side, and I'm trying to tie them out, so maybe a quick reconciliation of this Exhibit D, which I'm seeing for the first time, against this schedule might be a good exercise, just so everything is
Yeah.
apples to apples.
Well, and Exhibit D,
And
in
and again, if I can, just, Jen, if you'll note that down for kind of one of the action items also, so we'll get that done at
Yeah,
the same time.
That's good, thank you.
when I spoke to Mr. Firefighter Pond about Exhibit D, I mentioned in my report that he had used the word acting as opposed to provisional, and I said,
Right.
geez, that's, he said, no, it really should be provisional, and I see that what we got says provisional, and I just got this myself this morning, so that part of it's corrected, and again, he did this based upon the seniority list, and I think this is, the memo was sent to Chief Fellner, I think, to help him understand exactly the dates that occurred. And the other thing that Mr. Firefighter Pond did was provide Exhibit E, because we had gotten some seniority lists, and through the chief. And what I asked him really was, I wanted the seniority lists that were in effect at the time that the transfers and the promotions were made, and that's really what Exhibit E is. And it took him a little while to create the data to produce this schedule.
Right, and that's kind of new to us as well. I'm seeing that
Yeah.
for the first time as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's helpful. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. I think that's all of the one last clarifying question, and I've been doing this along the way. I've been using interchangeably provisional and acting. And can you just clarify that? Are they the same? Are they technically correctly the same, or
Well,
is there a difference that's material to the conversation?
yes.
Okay.
I think the difference is provisional, it's spelled out in the contract that when you are a provisional officer, you retire, you are considered an officer for that position, whereas there's no clause in there that says acting is the same. Now, I know, and it may be, just a term of use over the course of the years that acting and provisional are the same thing. I don't think that's true in the contract. And it's interesting because if it were true, you would think that you would find people who would retire when they were quote-unquote acting lieutenant, which doesn't make sense. That if you were going to put someone's out with the flu, and you put somebody into the acting position, he now says, oh, I'm going to retire, I'm now a lieutenant.
Right.
That doesn't make logical sense, but that doesn't mean anything either. But practically speaking, I think there is a difference. And the difference is that in order to get the enhanced benefit, you need to actually be promoted to provisional.
Become promoted to a provisional, which leads me to my last clarifying question, which is, can you just help me understand what the proper process is for somebody to become a provisional lieutenant? Is it solely at the discretion of the chief, or does it have to go through a commission? Is there a process? I'm just not crystal clear on that.
Well, it goes through the chief, and typically if there's a seniority list, you would identify the next person to be put in the position. I mean, a promotion list. You would put somebody into the next position, but in this case, it was done on the basis of seniority because there was no list in place. But it's discretionary. There's nothing that mandates that somebody be named a provisional lieutenant or a provisional chief after X number of days. In fact, the only thing the contract says is that as it relates to provisional lieutenants, that the job has to be left open for 8 weeks before the promotion can be made. And in the meantime, people get the benefit of getting overtime while that position is open. The assistant chief position, you can make a provisional assistant chief at the discretion of the chief. There's no 8-week waiting period, if you will. There's if the chief believes that the position is going to be open for I'll probably say the words wrong, considerable period or some duration, then he can make the promotion.
Okay, but that would be a promotion to an acting, not a provisional, right?
Provisional chief.
Provisional chief, okay. So
Acting chief
okay, so just one last point on that. The position's open, the 8 weeks go by, so if that open position qualifies for it to become a provisional.
correct.
What is the process? Is that solely at the discretion of the chief, or does the fire commission have to opine and approve that recommendation?
Under the way the contract is worded, I would say that in the way it's been implemented, it's the chief's decision to put somebody into the position. Now, it's a logical question to say, well, geez, the charter says that the fire commission is supposed to oversee all promotions.
That's kind of where I'm going.
Is that a promotion or not? And I guess the way it's been interpreted in the past, that it isn't, because the fire commission, at least as far as the minutes that I have, show no notations or references to these promotions being made in their minutes. And certainly, that's a legitimate question to ask.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your time and your efforts. Thank you, sir.
Cristin, any follow-up?
Questions wise, no. I think to follow up to Selectman Kiley, we've had a busy week as a board, and certainly in the town with the budget being our primary focus. And I just would comment that I certainly haven't given these documents the time and attention they deserve. And I'm glad that we're having an initial conversation, and certainly hope to be able to follow up when I've been able to more fully digest and put these pieces together.
And just, for the time, I know the first selectman mentioned that he thought this would be done sooner. He sort of made that opinion without really checking with me. I sort of read in the paper that this had to be done in 30 days and said, geez, I have some other things I have to do in the meantime. And so to the extent that this got delayed, I take responsibility for that. And that's just my schedule.
All right. Attorney Trembecki, one, thank you very much, and I appreciate the thoroughness and pulling both the exhibits and kind of putting all the pieces together here. As I mentioned earlier, the Board of Selectmen just received this yesterday at noon, and as you mentioned, with the 2 follow-up exhibits just today. And as is, I guess, obvious to at least the 3 of us, if not everybody else, there was a Board of Finance meeting last night that ran till 2 a.m., so that concerning the budget, and that's kept us somewhat occupied. We definitely need, I think, to review this, but more importantly, I think that according to the charter of our town, the Fire Commission has a key role to play in the management of the fire department. And it would seem to be a good next step is to hear back from the Fire Commission. And I know Attorney Trembecki, we've talked to the chair, that Chairman Popolowski and the Fire Commission, and scheduled time for you to give this report to them, given their role in the process. And I think our board would be interested in hearing their recommendations and any actions they deem appropriate. Once they've reviewed it, that also gives us time to review this in a bit more detail. So I guess from an action item, if it's okay with my colleagues.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I am Richard Saxel. For the record, I am representing Chief Fellner, who asked me to be here today. I received this report from Mr. Trembecki this morning, and from Chief Fellner yesterday evening. I tried to respond to it as expeditiously as I could. I think there's some errors in the report. I have given each of you the document here in which I've said what I've said, but I'd like a few minutes just to highlight where I think Mr. Trembecki is a little bit off the mark. It might expedite the process and get you to a conclusion that would be beneficial to the town.
2 thoughts there. One, just for Attorney Saxel is correct. We were all given this report just at the start of the meeting in terms of his comments. I think it makes the most sense because the Fire Commission is directly involved that those comments should be heard in front of the Fire Commission. Again, we're just getting a chance to review these, and certainly we have a copy of your remarks at this point, unless my colleagues feel otherwise and would like to hear more at this point.
I think my gut response is that since we're here and Attorney Saxel is here, I haven't been able to review this at all. So to be fair, I think we're at a bit of a disadvantage in that sense, and I understand that you were just responding in the time frame that you had. So, but I am inclined to have Attorney Saxel make a few remarks so that we can have that information, just as we've been given the information from Attorney Trembecki. And then I still agree that the Fire Commission is, per the charter, is the first selectman in the Fire Commission. So.
I'm a little uncomfortable getting a presentation of this magnitude on a document that was just handed to me as I walked in the door. It's a pretty heavy document, and I'm assuming there's some technical and legal language in here that relates to this matter that is of importance. So I agree with Mr. Tetreau that I believe that all of this should be presented to the Fire Commission as a starting point for them to hear this, hear that, begin to evaluate it, and then begin to advise us on what their opinions and thinkings are. I think in the spirit of fairness, I wouldn't be opposed to hearing a couple top-level comments, but I don't think it would be proper to go into this report in anything but a couple-minute.
I would just be cursory because I think my goal is to help focus.
I think he's
where
right, but I'm trying to be respectful of what you guys are trying to do, which is a difficult balance here. But I think anything more than a couple minutes of a point there and a point there, I think would be counterproductive because I haven't even opened this document up, and that's my fear.
I understand. I can be very brief.
All right. And to be fair, we haven't had a chance to review Attorney Trembecki's report in any more detail, but given that's the wish of the board, if you would be...
Thank you, Josh. I do have copies of my report for any of those of you who would be interested. I tried to hand them out. My name is Richard Saxel, and I've been retained by Chief Fellner to help respond to this process because he had some concerns about the way it was going. I will try to be brief in consideration of the many long hours you've spent over the last week and the fact that you're just beginning this. Let me deal with some of the critical things here. There's a really important thing you need to understand, which is past practice. And Mr. Trembecki alluded to it. And when you have when you have Chief Russell dealing with things and similar things 20 years ago, you have something called a past practice. It's a practice that's been relied upon by the fire management and the fire union for decades. And if you get too far out of that, you're going to be making a mistake. Let me jump to a really critical issue, which is the issue involving the training officer. Because, you know, the acting chief Tracy went to a meeting in Chief Fellner's office, which is prefaced by something pretty simple. The chief said, look, none of this is going to happen unless everybody agrees. There was a discussion. Chavanillo was there, acting chief. Tracy, acting chief, was there. At Tracy's request, the meeting was had. There were 2 union representatives. At the end, everybody agreed that acting Chief Tracy was going to go onto the line. That's the only reason this ever happened. As soon as that happened, what happened? The chief said, fine, that's it. He gave the order then and there. That was a lawful order of the chief. And everything flows from that. You don't get to do a do-over on this. You don't get to be Tracy and say, oh, I changed my mind because I need this, that, or the other. It doesn't happen that way. The lawful order was given. Something is made of the fact that, well, it wasn't going to take effect for a couple of weeks. Well, guess what? It takes that long to get people who are rotating shifts in place, so that if you're a firefighter and you're on the day shift, you can go home and say to your wife, well, gee, I'm going to be on the night shift in 2 weeks. It's done that way. That is the way they always do it. So once it was done, it was set in stone. It was set, it was done, it was finished. And it was done according to past practice. It was done exactly the way it was supposed to be done, and it was done with unanimous consent by everybody. As far as Lieutenant Curry goes, the chief was unaware of the fact that A.C. Curry wanted to become the training officer. Had he known that, he would have appointed Curry the training officer, because Curry had seniority, and also for this particular thing, you need to be certified to train, which he was. So obviously, that was rectified as soon as Acting Chief Chavanillo retired. Chavanillo intended to be in place for a lot longer than he in fact was, but personal things happen in lives, and not everything is within control. That is basically what happened. Understand past practice. Understand once it was done, it was done. You don't get to change your mind. You don't get do-overs here. There's a lot more in here. You've been very kind to give me a couple of minutes, and I thank you for it.
Attorney Saxel,
Yes,
if
sir.
I might, since this is going to be heard before the Fire Commission in terms of, will you be able to attend that meeting too as part of that? I believe that's April 18th.
No, I will not be there April 18th. I'm going to be out of the country on a long-planned vacation.
Okay, then I don't mean to get into scheduling that, but perhaps you can sort that out with the Fire Commission.
I'd be happy to do it, because the chief has indicated that you were going to pick up my fees such that they were reasonable, so I'd be happy to be there. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not really getting into public comment at this point, but Ms. Barrett, since you were a past fire commissioner?
I just have a couple comments to make. Susan P. Barrett, 122 Wilton Road, former fire commissioner for many, many years. At the Fire Commission, many times the chief, during private executive session, will give us an overview of personnel issues. Not specifically, but what's happening, how things are going, and he keeps us abreast. Therefore, Mr. Trembecki, you wouldn't have any minutes on that, because at a private executive session, that is done just for that purpose. And I just want to say that I can just say a contract is a contract. I'm sure we're not pleased with the end result, But there's a way to fix that. That's called the future. But I believe that the chief and our fire commission were living with that contract. And the inconvenient truth was Sandy hit Fairfield. And we did not have the list and the time to do the testing and what we needed. So those are my few comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. I think that, again, to Ms. Barrett's point, one of the reasons for asking the Fire Commission to come back to us with some recommendations and what their actions might be is because they're more fully informed, certainly, than this board was or is on this. So, Mr. Chairman, I know you're here, but I will send you an email along those regards. But look forward to hearing back from your board, and hopefully things can be scheduled appropriately to include Attorney Saxel in that also. Any further comments from this?
No.
All right. And again, Attorney Trembecki, thank you very much. Thank you for the thoroughness of your report. Thank you for taking time to be here, and appreciate your flexibility in working with the Fire Commission on getting it updated there. If there are, to my colleagues, if there are any questions that come up in the meantime, if you could route those through me, I'll get those to Attorney Trembecki.
Absolutely.
So that he can get back to us with any responses.
Thank you.
And we'll schedule any follow-up sessions as appropriate.
May I just add, and thanks to the Fire Commission members who are here and the chief as well. And it's nice to see you, Mr. Saxel.
And then you've got to say thanks to the former Fire Commissioner.
And the former, that's right, that's
right.
right. I'm remiss, thank you very much.
She left out her Board of Finance years.
The
They don't count.
18 years, who's counting?
Board of Finance is not on our favorite person list at the moment. The next up, to hear, consider, and act on any communications. The only communication I have was from Attorney Saxel.
I have
That's
it.
been distributed out to the board.
Got it. Thanks, guys.
To hear, consider, and act upon any other business that
The
shall properly
refunds.
come.
We need to do our refunds.
All right. Oh, all right.
Oh,
So,
yeah. I'll sign them
May I have a
as...
motion to accept the tax collector refunds?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Next up, private executive session concerning pending litigation. May I have a motion to go into private executive session?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
If I could.
Whenever you're ready.
All right, may I have a motion to come back into public session?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're back in public session. May I have a motion to accept our attorney's recommendation?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Just as part of the discussion, I want to mention that there were, in private executive session, there were no votes taken and no motions made. Any further discussion on the motion before us?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. Attorney Fleischman, thank you.
Good night.
All right, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.